It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. So it's time for our Agile, Not So Agile episode of the Daily Stand Up. Happy Friday. Today I wanted to talk to you I guess I'll start with a story again. Here we go. It's always a story. So the story starts years ago, I taught a religious studies class filled with the stars of a senior class. We had Mr. Macho, the all state quarterback, a heart stopper of every young lady in the school, little Miss Pep, the head of varsity cheerleading, Mr. President, the student body leader, and Mr. Most Likely to Succeed, and Mr. Brains, a young man who had already been offered several full ride scholarships to some pretty prestigious universities. One day, we all learned a sorry lesson that almost any of us can bend to peer pressure, and here's how it happened. I'd read a magazine article on negative peer pressure. The article described an experiment I was tempted to try to run on my class of achievers. The experiment was designed to show, in a very convincing way, how powerful peer pressure can be. It didn't really occur to me that the experiment might have negative consequences. In class the next morning, I did as instructed in the experiment. On the chalkboard, I drew a star, a circle, an oval, and a square. I told my class that for the next 50 minutes, the objects on the board were to be identified as a star, a circle, an oval, and a triangle. Even though the square was obviously a square, it was now to be called a triangle and nothing else. In a moment, they would have an opportunity to convince an unsuspecting visitor that the square was actually a triangle. 6 fold out seats were set in front of the classroom. Mr. Quarterback, Miss Pep, Mr. President, Mr. Most Likely to Succeed, and Mr. Brains were invited to take their seats, leaving one vacant chair. I invited a freshman student into the classroom. He immediately recognized that he was among the most elite of the whole high school. The students made him welcome. In no time, he was feeling right at home. He was with the who's who of the school, and he was thriving and taking in every minute of it. I invited him to take a seat in the one remaining chair in front of the class. I explained that when it came his turn, he was to simply identify the objects that were drawn on the board. He agreed, and the others smiled. The lesson began. Mr. Quarterback, we identified objects on the board. In his deep macho voice, he said star, circle, oval, and he says, and triangle. He said that confidently. Our visitor, forget himself, let out a sly laugh that conveyed the idea. You've been sacked a few many times, buddy. A few too many times, buddy. But the rest of the people in the room fell absolutely silent. The freshman quickly searched the faces of those present for acknowledgement. Mr. Quarterback's obvious mental fumble, but the students were playing their part. To them, that square was nothing more than a triangle. Mr. Freshman was bewildered. I turned to Miss Pep. Would you please identify on the boards? She enthusiastically replied, star, circle, oval, triangle. The freshman fidgeted in his seat. The class remained silent and nonchalant. Twice more the question was asked. Mr. President and Mr. Most Likely to Succeed answered in perfect form. By now, our visitor looked slightly ill and had that may I just leave expression on her face. Star, circle, oval, triangle, Mr. Brains answered. Now it was Mr. Freshman's turn. With each object, his voice grew weaker, shakier, and less confident. He said, star, circle, oval. Then silence. We all looked at him. He looked at us. What's the last object? I asked. Silence. Come on, what is it? Then finally, very quietly, he spoke. Triangle. I thought would all break the tenseness with a good laugh. The experiment had worked, but instead there was silence. I searched the student faces, and they were all deep in thought, and some heads were hung low. Then it hit me. Each one in the class could relate to the embarrassed freshman. Each, in a foolish moment, wanting to so badly be accepted or be part of a group, had, in their own way, called their very own square a triangle, and committed wrong when there was no misunderstanding. Even I could add my name to that list. And we all realized, especially me, that we had been unkind to Mr. Freshman in such an awkward situation. When the remainder of our class time, we spent the remainder of our class time sharing feelings of regret and regrets, but more importantly, sharing desires, hopes, and longings to be more courageous. Mr. Quarterback put his arm around Mr. Freshman, and we all reassured him that we made a mistake of bowing to pressure before, too. By the end of class, of course, he was accepted by his peers, not because he'd given in, but because we'd all come to see the importance of never surrendering or calling a square despite the consequences. When the bell rang, we all left as a group, all wiser, more hopeful, and with greater resolve to fight a good battle amid the pressures of the world. What I can tell you is in the world we live in, there are a lot of people who don't want to call a square. They'll call it anything but a square. Part of that is social pressure. Part of that's pressure from media. Part of it's pressure from individuals or special interest groups. And I think that we need to go out of our way to recognize that just because people appear to be one thing, they may not be that thing. And I think the big message that I took away from here is that maybe it's time for us to stop with all the categories, right? That why do we need to separate people into squares and triangles, etc.? I think that it's equally important for us to recognize that each of them have talents, each of them have god-given beauty, each of them have all the things that they need. It's just for whatever reason the pressures of the world teach us that it's important for us to pressure people to see, think, feel, or look a certain way. And whether you're talking about teenagers in your home in high school or middle school, or whether you're talking about individuals in a workplace, I think it's just important for us to realize and recognize that we're all different. There's far too many bullying things that you read and issues with people who lack self confidence or whatever the case may be. I think it's just important for us to stand up for everyone and not let them be pressured into feeling, thinking, or believing certain things. And what I can tell you is that if we can gain control of what we think and what we feel, and we can help uplift other people, that over time, it's going to have a cascading effect and it's going to make the world a better place. But I think it all starts with you, and I think that's the key. That's the piece that's missing. That's the missing cog in the wheel. And I think that too often we don't take advantage of the ability that we have to make a difference. So find a way to make a difference. Find a way to show love and gratitude. And until next Monday, do take care.